but it's in Greek. And so in that canon, sometime between the 3rd century BC and the 2nd century BC, the Judaic canon begins to appear in Greek. And so the Septuagint is the Judaic canon. Remember the Tanakh. Basically, that's what it is. But it's written in the Greek language, so it's called Septuagint. And so you've probably heard that phrase before, Septuagint. That's what it is. Now, you probably heard this term before, Talmud. Talmud. And you say, well, I thought that was the Tanakh. I thought that was the Septuagint. No, the Talmud's not. The Talmud is this body of oral tradition. It's a part of Judaism, but it's that collected body of oral tradition that adherents to Judaism would follow. So it's really a body of oral tradition. So collectively, that was called the Talmud. Some of you are Christians, and you probably know where Jesus addresses teachings that the Jews were following, and he's like, you've added stuff to this. You've added burdens onto what the Lord had given you.
What was Septuagint one more time?
Septuagint is the Judaic canon in Greek. So if it's written in Greek, if the Judaic canon is written in Greek, it's called Septuagint. Okay, and the Talmud is that Judaic body of oral tradition. Oral tradition is the key words.
Body of oral tradition.
Oral tradition.
What? He said body of oral tradition where Judaism would follow, right?
Judaism is the religion. And so the body of oral tradition associated with Judaism is called the Talmud. You understand?
Not really, but...
Okay. All right, so in order to appreciate and understand the faith that is Judaism, so we're talking about Judaism. In order to appreciate and understand the faith, one must know, we really need to know, and at least to some extent, we need to at least know to some extent some of that Hebrew nation's history. Right? Now, just go ahead and jot that idea down. Just, maybe you don't understand it, but go ahead and jot it down. There it is, word for word. Just kind of jot that down, and then I'm going to explain it.
To appreciate and understand the faith, one must know at least some of the Hebrew nation's history.
Yes. You got it?
Yeah.
You don't?
I don't get it, but I got it written down.
Oh, okay. You got it written down. Good. All right. So just think, in order to appreciate and understand the faith, should put a comment there, one must know at least some of the Hebrew nation's history. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to understand that religion, you've got to see what they believe their history to be through their lens. Not some academic today. Not some scholar today. You're not going to understand the religion if you're looking at it through some secular scholar's view today. But now if we look at that nation's history through the lens of those who are believers, then it kind of makes a little more sense. That's what I'm trying to express. Does that make sense? Sometimes we don't understand where a person's coming from because we can't look at it from their perspective. And if we just try to kind of get in their shoes, then it makes a little more sense. Sort of like walking in a person's shoes for a little while. Okay? And so this Hebrew nation's history. Now like I said, I'm not trying to defend against some sort of secular scholar who's got a different view. Maybe some biases, one way or the other. But the Hebrew nation's history can oftentimes be divided, just like you could cut a pie a whole lot of different ways. That history can be divided into a lot of periods. But here are some real basic periods that make up that nation's history. There was a period called the period of patriarchs, a period that's called the period of Exodus, a period called the period of conquest, so on and so forth. A period called Judges, a period called the kingdom period or the kingdom era, a period called exile, a period called return, and it took many decades for that to occur, and then a period called silence, or you could add to that silence and waiting. But we could just go with silence. Silence and waiting. Okay, so there are all the different periods of that nation's history from the perspective of a follower of Judaism. Okay? So I'm going to give you a minute to jot those down. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to break those periods down with a figure or two. I'll put one person in it that you can maybe associate with that period, kind of helping you understanding of how their religion works and how they see it. Okay, so as soon as you guys get that jotted down, kind of give me that thumbs up. You're like, yeah, I got it.
Exile, return, and silence. Okay.
So we're all pretty good there. Okay. All right. All right, so there was this period of patriarchs. If you think about patriarchs, we're thinking about family leaders. A period of patriarchs. See, that original patriarch that is that makes up the Hebrew nation, that Jewish nation. They would say, well, our father. Well, who are your fathers? Well, our father is Abram or Abraham. All Jews believe that originally they can trace their ancestry back to this one man whose name is Abram or Abraham. So there's going to be a period of patriarchs where a nation's going to begin to come out of that, right? It's going to grow. So this is the original guy. They would trace their nation's history back to this guy named Abraham. Now, Abraham, they believe that Abraham is from, let me go back. Go back here. Got another map. There we go. Let's look at this. They believe that Abraham, y'all remember we talked about this place called Mesopotamia? It's a part of the Fertile Crescent. Well, right there on the edge of the Persian Gulf, there was an ancient city called the city of Ur. You heard me right. It's Ur. 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 Well, they believe that their father, their founder of their nation, and so in that respect, if they're followers of Judaism, the founder of the faith, is this guy named Abram or Abraham. And they believe that God makes a promise to Abraham. Right? Makes a promise, or we could say, we could use a religious term, covenant. That means a contract with God. And it went something like this. Abraham, get up and go to and you don't have to jot this down, but I'm just trying to paint a picture for you, right? You know, if you're a person that already knows this, or you're like, I know this picture, well, that's fine. Some people may not know this picture. But they believe that God makes a promise to Abraham. Hey, Abraham, if you'll get up and you'll go to a place that I'm going to show you, I'll make a great nation out of you. I'm going to give you a good land. I'll make a great nation out of you. And there's always this little addendum to that. He said, and all the nations of the world will be blessed through you. And so adherents to Judaism believe that Abraham was faithful in that God had spoken to him. And so he takes all of his wealth, everything that he has, and he begins this sort of life where he's just following the direction he believes God's leading him to. And it makes sense that it would make this trajectory, that it makes this arch. Remember the arch called the Fertile Crescent? he begins to travel between the Tigris and the Euphrates. And he goes up through this way. There's an ancient city of Iran. He's hanging out in Iran, and he's making his way down along this area. That you've heard of this area called Canaan. You don't have to know this, but I'm just kind of painting a picture here. Like I said, there's this area along the eastern coast of the Mediterranean called Canaan, and Canaan was real fertile. It was green, it was lush, it was a great place, especially you go back as far back as he would go. It was a real cool environment, and adherents to Judaism believes, man, that was the land that God had promised him. And so you got Abram or Abraham. Now, in that period of patriarchs, there's a number of guys that are important during that time of patriarchs. It's really not a nation, but it's a family that's growing. Some of you guys know that Abram or Abraham has a wife. It would just translate Sarah. Had a wife named Sarah. Sarah's really good looking, isn't she? She's a beautiful woman, right? Yes, she's good looking. You say, well, how do you know she's good looking? Well, Abraham, it's good that you think your wife's beautiful, right? But Abraham really thinks his wife's beautiful. He's like, dude, you're one good looking woman. And here's how you know that. Because as he's traveling, he comes into some cities and he's like, hey, Sarah, you're so beautiful. If we go into this city, they're going to try to kill me to get you. So let's do this. Let's just say you're my sister, okay? I know it's a little bit of a lie, but let's just go ahead and do that. That way they won't be trying to kill me to get to you. All right? And so he's got this wife named Sarah. Now, I'm going to tell you what. Adherents to Judaism believe that God had promised him to make a great nation out of him. To make a great nation, he and Sarah will have to have children, won't they? Yeah, got to have kids. Well, it was probably a problem. All these years they're making this trek. Ain't no kids. No children. And so, man, they're like, I believe I'm trusting God. God's going to give us a child. And so, man, we're just trusting God in that. But it never happens. Eventually, Sarah comes to the conclusion, well, maybe God intends to do things differently. Here's what. And you don't have to know this. You don't have to know this, but it just, I think, makes for an interesting story. She had a servant whose name was Hagar. You don't have to know that. Anyway, it's Hagar. That's kind of an odd name for a woman. I agree. Maybe it wasn't odd back then. But there was this servant named Hagar. She says, I tell you what I'm going to do. Why don't I give you Hagar to sleep with? And if she becomes pregnant, it'll just kind of be ours. And I'm going to tell you what, Abraham might have been a smart guy, but this was a dumb move. I'm going to just tell you, it's just a dumb move. And so he's like, but he's a guy. Pretty young lady, and he's like, okay, that sounds good. Let's do that. And so they sleep with each other, and sure enough, she gets pregnant, and she has a son. And so in that period, and we're not going to put this guy in the patriarch classification for Israel, for the Jews, but he's a player in this story. So Abraham sleeps with Hagar, has this son, and he's really the first one. His name was Ishmael. Ishmael. Man, a whole lot could be said about that. Just tons. It's interesting stuff. We ain't got time. But that's not the next patriarch. I'm going to give you a couple patriarchs. Next patriarch ended up being Isaac. All right, because eventually what happens, of course, Sarah's real jealous of Hagar, and Hagar's like, I had a son and you didn't, ha ha ha, and there's a big brouhaha about all that. But eventually Sarah does get pregnant in her latter years, in old age. She gets pregnant. She has this son, and his name's Isaac. Now, adherents to Judaism and Jews in general believe that if they were going to trace their ancestry, they will trace it back all the way to Abraham through Isaac, not Ishmael. No, not Ishmael, but through Isaac. All right, so you've got that period of patriarchs, and that's really that. And Jacob would be the next. So I'll just give you three. Jacob would be the next guy. So you've got Abraham. He has a son. His name's Isaac, and he has a son, and his name's Jacob. And anytime there's this significant encounter with God, a lot of times for the Jews, they believe that they would have this name change, or they would need to have a name change. And so Jacob has a name change. In their text, Jacob will also be called Israel. And that's a significant name, right? Because you've heard of Israel before, right? We've heard of a nation state today called Israel, right? And so that's where that's coming from. So Jacob, he's going to be the next patriarch. And Jacob has a whole bunch of sons. I mean, he has a ton of sons. He's got 12 sons. Not including daughters. He's got 12 sons. And so you see this family begins with this patriarch Abraham. During this period of patriarch, we see what? Families are growing. Families are growing. Eventually, because of things happening in that family, that really large family, they will migrate. You don't have to know this guy. We don't have time. They'll migrate down into an area called Egypt. And I wish I had time to tell you that story. But it ends up, following Jacob's family really growing, they end up in Egypt. Okay? You say, well, what period is that? Well, it would begin in that Old Kingdom period. It would go all the way into that Middle Kingdom. There's a whole lot of debate about when, where, and if. But now we're talking about adherence to Judaism, and Jews in general, they believe that they grow into a nation, not in Canaan, but in Egypt. Okay? So just kind of painting this picture. Y'all got the picture going? And so there's about 400 years, man, where kids are having kids, and kids are having kids, and kids are having kids, and they're not having two, they're not having one, they're having 10, 15, 20 kids. And so you can see over the course of 400 years, you get several dozen families going, and those families, that's exponential growth. And over the course of about 400 years in a place called Egypt, you find yourself a nation of people. Hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of Jews. And that's what Jews believe their history is. And so you've got this period that's called the period of patriarchs, where a nation grows up. And then, of course, there's a period of Exodus, because Jews believe, and it certainly adheres to Judaism, believe that the land that God promised the original founder of the faith, the original founder of the nation, they don't believe that it's Egypt. Oh no, they believe it's this area called Canaan, Eastern Mediterranean. So, there's got to be a leaving, doesn't there? A leaving's got to take place. A departure from Egypt to Canaan. Okay, so been down there 400 years. Eventually, and of course now, again, we're looking at it from adherence to Judaism's perspective. I'm not telling you what to believe here, but adherence to Judaism certainly believe that they become slaves to Egyptian taskmasters. And so you can see ancient Egypt and all of the monumental architecture, all of the edifices, all of the construction. It takes a huge workforce. Well, eventually they will leave Egypt and begin to traverse back to the land they believed that God had promised them originally. Just kind of painting this picture. Y'all, he's like, I've seen this picture before. Well, good. Some people may not have seen this picture. And so that period in which they leave Egypt and make their way towards the land that they believe God had promised them as a nation, that was called the Exodus. And some of you know who the principal character of the Exodus is. Some of you don't know, but I'm going to make you responsible for this guy. It's a real guy. What's his name? That's right. His name was Moses. You've all heard of Moses. You saw Charlton Heston's original Moses way back in the day. You're like, I don't even know who Charlton Heston is. Well, you need to watch some Charlton Heston movies then. Well, Moses. So there's this huge exodus that's going to take place, and adherents to Judaism believe that there is a period in their nation's history that could be defined as the period of Exodus, where they leave Egypt and they make their way into, or at least towards, the land that God had promised them. Now, how does Moses get these guys out of here? Adherents to Judaism believe what? The hand of God leading Moses is going to take them out of Egypt, right? And so you've got this period called the period of Exodus, and it's pretty fantastic. Could it be Amenhotep? I don't believe so, but some historians would put it in that time. I believe it's too late. But anyway, that's beside the point. So you've got a period of Exodus. There's going to have to be a period of conquest. because they believed that that land on the eastern side of the Mediterranean is the land that God had promised them. If a nation could grow up in Egypt over the course of 400 years, our population is going to grow over the course of 400 years on the eastern side of the Mediterranean, which is a really good land? Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And so there is going to be that period for them. They would say, well, there's a period of conquest as they take back the land that they believe God had promised them from the beginning. So it's the period of conquest. I'm going to give you a principal figure. So we got a principal figure for the period of Exodus. He's called Moses, right? Everybody's heard of that? Ain't no way you're going to miss out on the test, is there? No way. There's also a period of conquest where they're taking, through war, they're taking it back. They're taking what they believe was the land that God promised them back. And the principal figure that I'll make you responsible, although there are several, is this guy named Joshua. Joshua is the principal figure, right? In leading the Jews, or you could say according to their tongue, the Hebrews, leading them into that land and taking that land. What's the land called? The land of Canaan. All right, so Joshua was the principal figure. Probably one of the most famous events of the conquest was the destruction of this ancient city called Jericho. Was there Jericho? Yes. Was Jericho destroyed? Yes. It was destroyed. It was. Okay, so you've got a period of conquest. You got the destruction of Jericho. Joshua was the principal leader. And so then you've got a period of time called the period of Judges. You say, well, you're not giving us hard dates. Well, it's very speculative as far as dates and timing at this point. You can't get a lot of agreement. Eventually you will, but you can't right at this point. But you've got a period of time where conquest takes place, right? A period of time called the period of Judges. The reason it's called the period of Judges is because there wasn't this strong central government established, but there were, I'm not getting too specific, I'm not going to ask you questions about this, but I'm just kind of painting the picture. Those 12, you remember the 12 sons of that guy that was called Israel? They represented 12 tribes, okay? And so the nation itself consisted of 12 tribes, 10 plus 2 more. I don't have 12 fingers. And so they represented those 12 tribes. So there were 12 tribes that inhabited the land that would eventually be called Israel. There were 12 tribes. And so they're claiming different parts of this area that's on the eastern side of the Mediterranean. They're claiming different areas, different parts. And sometimes, hey, do you ever have family get-togethers and get into squabbles?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's every family. You get enough people together, there's going to be disagreement. There's going to be people at odds sometimes. And that's the same way with these 12 tribes and families within these tribes. And so that period of Judges was a period of time where judges of Israel would decide issues related to tribal conflict or dispute, or family conflict or dispute. And so they were called judges. Oftentimes these judges were also leaders in war, because all of the people groups of Canaan were not a part of Israel, were they? So they had other people groups that they would be in conflict with. And so those judges would be leaders in war as well. And so you got that period of judges. They're not kings. They're the period of judges. And probably the most famous of the judges was a guy named Samson. You've all heard of Samson. There were many judges. But this most famous one, at least from the perspective of adherents of Judaism, right? They believe that there was this guy named Samson. Samson.
Is that the one with grown long hair? He got stronger?
That's it. So there was this guy named Samson, and I misspelled it, I'm sorry. It's going to be Sampson. But there's this guy named Samson who was a judge. He was a judge. Now, adherents to Judaism and their canon teaches, and of course the Christian canon embraced it as well, that this guy was supernaturally empowered by God. You don't have to know all this. By God to rule But he had, from the very beginning, taken the vows of a Nazarite, which that meant there's 3 things that this guy could not do. Right? He's been completely dedicated to God, and there were 3 things he couldn't do. He couldn't touch those things that were dead. He couldn't drink strong drink, so he can't have a brewski with you on Friday night. Okay? So he couldn't drink strong drink, couldn't touch things that were dead, and a very outward sign of this devotion was this: he could never cut his hair. So Steve, you were right. He couldn't touch his hair. Couldn't cut it, right? Well, you all know this, right? You've all heard this before. And so he was a significant judge. The significant enemy for during that period of judges was a particular group called the Philistines. You ever heard of them? They were called the Philistines. You know that word that's sometimes used for this part of the world today, Palestine? You ever heard of that? Mm-hmm. You ever wondered where that word came from? That's where it comes from. The Philistine people. And so then that was a huge adversary of theirs, the Philistines. And a lot of stories in the canon, in the Judaic canon, about Samson and his rule, or not his rule, but his time as a judge over Israel. Now he did have something going for him, didn't he? What did he have going for him?
He was very strong.
He was incredibly strong. He was incredibly strong. And what was so amazing about this? I mean, sometimes if you picture, I mean, you all heard the stories of Samson. You picture this guy that is something like off of WWF. You know, these big hulking, bulky guys. Somebody like the Rock. You know, just muscles on top of muscles. You know, kind of like some of you guys when you flex in the mirror, man. You're like, God, man, I'm awesome. You think of it like that, but the reality is he probably was not like that. Because people are looking at him and they're like, he ought not be able to do that. This guy shouldn't be able to do what he's doing. He's a regular guy, but he's got supernatural strength. And so you say, well, what kind of strength do you mean? Well, you know, just for a joke, because he's a kidder, he's like, hey, you know what would be funny? I'll pick up the post in the gates of this city when nobody's looking. I'll carry him over the hill and just set him down over there. Won't that be funny in the morning, right? That kind of strength. The kind of strength where he's like, you know what? I think I'm going to kill me some Philistines today. And he's like, but I ain't got nothing with me. Oh man, there's the jawbone of an ass. I'll pick that dude up and kill about 400 of them right there with that. You know, that kind of crazy strength. And so, he's a really strong man. The Philistines want to take him out. They just can't figure out, man, how we're going to take him out. Well, now, as strong as he was, and he loved to play games, man, he wasn't a wise guy. It's good when your judges are wise, isn't it? But this guy wasn't the wisest guy. He loved the ladies, though, and you're like, some of you guys are like, I can identify with that. This dude loved the ladies, man. He loved the ladies, right? He's one of these guys that, hey, whatever he wanted immediate gratification. He wanted it, you know, and he wanted it right away. And so he was going to get it. So he was a trickster, right? But he wasn't the wisest judge. And so you all know the stories of this. Eventually, his love of the ladies gets him in trouble, right? Because he goes down into this area, and it was sort of like the border area between Israel's lands and the Philistines' land. And so it was sort of a marginal area, kind of hanging out in the wrong place, kind of hanging out with the wrong folks. And he meets somebody down there in that land, and her name was what?
Sarah.
No, not Sarah. Sarah's Abraham's wife. She's not a hoochie mom.
Rebecca?
She's a hoochie mom. And so he meets Delilah, who's a prostitute, is a Philistine prostitute. And man, he just falls head over heels with this good-looking Philistine prostitute called Delilah. Right? And so, man, he's hanging out with Delilah, living with Delilah, and he's like, man, he's supposed to be a judge of God's people. Well, I didn't say he was the smartest guy in the world, but he's hanging out, he's head over heels with Delilah. Delilah's really not good for him. You say, well, how do you know, man? You're being a judge. No, I'm not being a judge. I'm just telling you the obvious. It probably is not working out for him.
How do you spell Philistine?
Philistine, Phili. right? Or E. E-S-T-I-N-E, Philistine. So he's hanging out there, and some of you know the story. The Philistine leaders are trying to figure out a way to get Samson. You can't just outright grab Samson. Why? Because he has supernatural strength. Right? And so they're trying to figure out this way, man, how are we going to get this dude? And they come up with an idea. We'll go through his girlfriend, Delilah. And so they offer her all kinds of wealth if she'll figure out and tell them the secret of this guy's amazing strength. You've heard this story, haven't you? You heard it before? Have you never heard this? Oh, my cheeks.
He cut his hair.
Anyway, here's what happened.
Didn't she cut her hair?
Well, hang on. You've cut to the chase. We got somewhere to go get there. All right, so anyway, so it finally she agrees. He's like, he's like, I'm going to kill your family if you don't. He said, okay, well, I will do it for you. And so she's trying to figure out why this guy's so strong. And she's just up front. And she's like, hey, Samson, I love you. Why don't you just tell me why you're so strong? And Samson, he's smart enough to know I probably better not. And so he's like, well, She's like, come on now, Samson, tell me why you're so strong. And so he starts off with something like this. It's like, hey, look, if you tie me up with cords, I'll be weak like other men. And so that's it. And so she's, like I said, he's not the smartest guy in the world. So as soon as he tells her, she's like, hey, Samson, why don't you take a little nap? Come here, Samson, you big hunk. You take a little nap. And so he's like, okay, man. So he lets lay down and go to sleep. Well, she gets the Philistines to come in and tie him up with green cords. And then she whispers this sweet nothing in his ear. She says, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. Well, Samson jumps up. Boom. Man, the green cords, that's like dental floss. Man, he jumps out of the green cords, and man, Philistines going out the window, and they all running for the hills. And she gets mad at him. She's like, Samson, now if I'm Samson, I'm smart enough to know this woman's bad news. I'm getting out of here. But no, not him. No. She's like, Samson, you lied to me. You didn't tell me why because you're still strong. And she says, I want to know. If you love me, I want to know. Hey, why are you so strong? Did you tell me green? Hey, look. You got to tie, it was something like green cords or old cords. You got to tie me with the other. And so she's like, is that right? So we just had the wrong cords? He's like, yeah, that's what you had. And so he's kind of going through that. And, each time, man, she says, you take a little nap, and takes a little nap, and then it just breaks up, just everything flies off. And so eventually he gets to this, she's like, she's mad. She's indignant every time, the Philistines can't overcome him. And so she's like, hey, I want you to tell me the truth. She's kind of badgering him. And he says, okay, well, hey, look, if you weave my hair into a weaver's loom, then I'll be weak as other men. So he's getting a little closer to truth, isn't he? And so she's like, okay, Samson, why don't you take a little nap? And so the weaver loom's brought in. This guy's obviously a really heavy sleeper, and they weave his hair into the weaver's loom. She whispers that sweet nothing into his ear. Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He jumps up. Weaver looms, I hope it wasn't a brand new one, because it flies into a gazillion pieces. Philistines going out the window. She's mad at him again, right? She's like, hey, Samson, you didn't tell me the truth. You say that you love me. You're not telling the truth. You're keeping secrets from me. And she begins, he's like, I can't tell you. And she just begins to badger him. Okay? Now, some of you guys don't understand that term badger, but if you get married for long enough, you get married, and after a while, there's going to be some point in time that you're going to get badgered. Right? And so she just begins to go on and on and on, and she's never stopping. She wants to know, and she's telling him all this. If you love me, you're not going to keep secrets. And it just day in and day out, and finally he's like, oh my gosh. Okay, here's what it is. I took a vow as a Nazarite. I busted the vows to pieces. I'm a party animal, and you know it. And so, that don't drink strong drink. He threw that out a long time ago. Don't touch dead things. Dude, I was touching dead things all the time. You know, he talks about as a young man, he's going down the road one day, going to visit some other gal, and a young lion comes out. And this young lion comes, and the lion's looking at a regular guy, and he's like, I'm fixing to eat this regular guy for lunch. And he doesn't know it's got Samson, and this big lion comes up, and man, he takes the lion, takes him by the top of the mouth, takes him by the bottom of the mouth, and unzips him, and throws him to the side, right? Goes on his way, parties. On the way back a few days later, he sees that carcass of that lion. No big deal, I kill lions with my bare hands. But he sees bees had set up in the carcass of the lion. And so he's like, I'm kind of hungry. I bet there's honey up in there. And so he goes in this nasty dead thing. And he reaches up in there and he pulls out a big honeycomb. And he begins to eat that honeycomb as he's walking back to his mom and dad's house. And when he gets home, he doesn't tell mom where he got it. He says, Mom, you want some honey? And she's like, yeah, give me some. And so he's busted all of the promises that he had made as a Nazarite. Touching dead things, partying like there's no tomorrow. And so he knows. I shouldn't tell her, but he tells her. Finally, she's badgering him. He says, okay, I took the vow of a Nazarite. I busted the first two. He said, you notice I've got really long hair? It's because I've never had it cut. If I cut my hair, I'll be weak as other men. I just believe that that's going to happen. And so she does this, man. She's like Samson, and she knows he's told her the truth finally. Why don't you take a little nap? And so Samson, like I said, he's not the smartest judge in the world. He takes a nap. Somebody comes in, the Philistines come in, they cut his hair. Cut it short like yours and mine. Right? She's like, Mr. Kimball, you don't have much hair. Well, I know that, but anyway, he cut it short. Right? Then she whispers that sweet nothing. Samson, Philistines are upon you. Sure enough, here they come. And it says that he goes out to do what he's always done, not realizing that his hair has been cut. And sure enough, he had lost his strength. They grabbed him, they gouged out his eyes, and then they put him down into like a cellar where there's a grinding house. And they're going to force him to grind grain for the Philistines like an old ox, day after day. And so that's this one of these judges, probably the most famous one. Some of you know that eventually his hair grows out, and there's a little bit of a different story to that. But that period of judges like Samson, the judges like you probably heard of a guy named Gideon and others. Jephthah, maybe you've heard of Jephthah. But there was a period of time. Here they are, they're in their land, but there's not a king. But now there will be, won't there? There is a kingdom period. Real quick, let's do this. Kingdom period. In that kingdom period, man, we do have dates. Eventually, like I said, man, you can go far enough back. The further back you go, it's more and more speculative. But dates become hard when you've got numerous ancient texts that are corroborating one another. And by the time you hit the kingdom period, you have numerous sources that are verifying time frames. Okay, does that kind of make sense? So that kingdom period, we're going to round this off. Around 1000 BC, there's no doubt there is a kingdom period, and these figures are kicking up dirt around 1000 BC. All right? Now, just throwing a couple of famous ones out here real quick. Don't want to do too many. But during that kingdom period, the first king of Israel was this guy named Saul. Saul's a big guy. All the tribes wanted a king. They wanted a king just like everybody else got a king. We want a king. So adherents to Judaism believed God said, okay, you want a king? You did. You're going to wish you didn't have a king, but we're going to give you a king. And so they select Saul. Saul's a big old guy. And he's the first king, but he's not the most famous king. He's first king, but he's not the most famous. Most famous king of all the kingdom period, without a doubt, is this guy named David. David. Yeah, David's the most famous king. He's the most famous king. Man, there's lots of stories to be told about David. Oh, I wish we had time. We ain't got time to tell them. But I will say this. David is the one that messianic prophecies are associated with. messianic prophecies. Okay? Messianic prophecies. He is the one that messianic prophecies are associated with. In other words, adherents to Judaism believed that a Messiah would come through the lineage of David. Okay? Now, some of you may not understand that. Maybe it'll be a little clearer in just a bit. But they believe that messianic prophecies, they're going to be associated with David, that a Messiah would come through the lineage of David. All right? So David's very famous. What is, and probably everybody knows this story associated with David. What is it?
Jesus.
What Jesus associated with David, sure. Yeah. This is the David and Goliath. Everybody's heard of Goliath. Man, that's a good story, but we're not going to have time. So David's going to have a son. David had numerous wives, and David has a son. You don't have to know who it's through, although some of you probably do know who it's through. David, like I said, David had numerous wives. He was a guy. He messed up. Okay? And he ends up having a son. And the next king was his son, a guy named Solomon. Anybody ever heard of Solomon?
Wait, David was Solomon's son?
No, Solomon is David's son.
That's what I'm meant.
Yeah, Solomon is David's son. He had a wife named Bathsheba. You don't have to know that, but yeah. And so Solomon was his son. Now Solomon, real guy, no doubt one of the wealthiest kings of the ancient world. Extremely wealthy. Israel prospered under the reign of Solomon.
Say that again?
One of the wealthiest kings of the ancient world was Solomon.
Uh-huh.
And Israel prospered under Solomon's rule. Now, I said a word. I said that Samson was not wise. You look at Samson's life, there's no wisdom in Samson's life. He's not wise. But now Solomon, what's famously associated with Solomon besides he was super rich?
But he killed a bunch of people, huh?
Well, Solomon didn't. No, Solomon didn't kill a bunch of people. He was very wise. Yeah, he was very wise. He was smart, but he was very wise. Sometimes you got a lot of smart people, they don't show wisdom. Sometimes we look at people who are very simple, and you see a lot of wisdom. You say, well, that doesn't make sense. Just live life and hang out with people long enough, you'll see that's true. I've got a Down syndrome friend. She wouldn't be considered by folks to be smart, but if you hang out with her, you see that she's wise. All right? And so Solomon was known for his wisdom. And I can tell you some stories about that, but we ain't got time. So you've got this kingdom period where Israel will have kings. Eventually what happens, though, is all sorts of problems arise in the history of that nation over time. Eventually, there's the northern tribes and the southern tribes kind of squabble, and they split up. 2 tribes make a southern kingdom. You don't have to know this. 2 tribes make a southern kingdom, and 10 tribes make a northern kingdom. And that northern kingdom, you have to know this, but that northern kingdom continued to be called Israel. That southern kingdom ended up being called Judah. All right? Now, before we look at this exile period, let me add something about Solomon, and I'll make you responsible for this. So if you just go back to Solomon, all right? He built the first temple for God. Adherents to Judaism would say he built the first temple for God, for the worship of God. He built the first temple. Yeah.
I thought his son finished it.
Solomon did. Solomon's son didn't finish it. Solomon finished it.
I thought he temple God for it.
No, Solomon built it. It was the wealth of Solomon and the construction under Solomon's reign. You just go back and look at it. Now it's going to have some refurbishing. There's going to be destructions and refurbishings. But he's the one that's credited with building it. And so Solomon has this built. this temple built, what city did he have it built in? So, man, dude, I feel like I'm in Sunday school. Well, that's okay, but what city? What city? Jerusalem. Yeah, this temple for the worship of God was built during the reign of Solomon in the city of Jerusalem. Now, so when we talk about Judaism as a religion, there is no city more holy, more sacred to Jewish people who are followers of Judaism than the city of Jerusalem. Oh, my chickens, that is very sacred. That is an important city. And so that temple was built. It was built. Like I said, though, eventually things begin to sort of devolve, and you end up having two kingdoms. You got a northern kingdom called Israel, a southern kingdom. Just northern kingdom, southern kingdom is all you need to know, called Judah. 10 tribes in the north, 2 tribes in the south. Jerusalem is in the southern kingdom, though. It would remain in the southern kingdom. And you all know what happens. You all kind of know how this plays out. Some of you have heard of, have you ever heard of the state called Syria today?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's based on this word, Assyria. Assyria. There was an ancient Assyrian empire. And the Assyrian people are going to invade that northern kingdom, and they take it over in 722 BC. That's what. So you know Assyria. So you just take Syria and put AS in front of it. Assyria right here. Here's Assyria. Like this would be modern day Turkey, right? So Assyria will invade the northern kingdom, and they take it in 722 BC. And all of those Jews are taken into exile at that point. Many of them are killed. But now the southern kingdom didn't fall to Assyria. But it will fall. Well, so you've got a period called exile. Begins in 722 BC when Assyria takes the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom finally falls in 605 BC. 605 BC. It doesn't fall to the Assyrian Empire. Hey, now we're going to go backwards a little bit. You remember we mentioned some of the earliest civilizations in that area of Mesopotamia. We talked about Sumer, we talked about Akkad, we talked about Babylon. Well, I said, hey, look, that was the old Babylonian kingdom. What ends up happening is a new Babylonian kingdom emerges right here. Let me find it. Right here. A new Babylonian kingdom appears, and it becomes very powerful, and it will invade the southern kingdom in 605 BC. The king of that so sometimes it's called the Neo-Babylonian, Neo meaning new, right? The Neo-Babylonian kingdom will take the southern kingdom of Israel, which is called Judah, takes the southern kingdom in 605 BC, and the key king is this guy named Nebuchadnezzar. And you're like, again, I feel like I'm in Sunday school. Well, it's a fact. Nebuchadnezzar was the king. He's going to take over the southern kingdom. And eventually, that fortified city called Jerusalem will fall. It'll fall to him in 586 BC. And so man, it's a mess, isn't it? So you've got this nation of people exiled to Assyria, eventually the southern kingdom exiled to Jerusalem, and the king is Nebuchadnezzar, and he goes into Jerusalem, and once he takes Jerusalem, dude, he's tearing place up. He destroys the walls, he burns the gates, the temple that was the key place of worship and sacrifice, he destroyed the temple. The temple that Solomon had built, he destroyed. All of the wealth of the temple, he takes back to Babylon. All right? They didn't kill all the Jews. Jews are going to be exiled. They're taken back to the Babylonian Empire. And so this becomes a part of a Babylonian Empire. Now, there are some key figures in that period called the exile. Right? Probably the most famous one of the most famous ones is a guy named Daniel. A guy named Daniel. You know what you can associate Daniel with? He becomes a very important guy in the Babylonian world, and eventually in the Persian world. But you know what? Daniel you can associate Daniel with what? Does anybody know?
The lion's den.
Lion's Den. Somebody said it. Lion's Den. Yeah, and you go back and maybe you can read about that. Just Google Daniel and the Lion's Den. You can read about what happened. Okay? But Nebuchadnezzar takes Jerusalem 586 BC. He takes many of the Jews back into exile in Babylon. It's not like they're all slaves. Some of them rise to prominence in the Babylonian world, like Daniel. Okay? All right. But now, eventually, what's going to happen, and I've given you a very specific date. It would have been October. For our calendar, it would have been in October of 539 BC. Babylon falls. So the Babylonian Empire falls. And it falls to a guy named Cyrus the Great. Now, I've already mentioned Cyrus. You're like, dude, you didn't mention Cyrus. Yes, I did. Cyrus the Great, right? And you know who Cyrus is? Cyrus is the guy who built the Persian Empire. You remember we talked about Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great's the one that's going to conquer the Persian Empire. Well, that Persian Empire was established by Cyrus the Great. Right? You remember, I believe I mentioned how Cambyses, his son, was in Egypt campaigning. And he receives this mortal wound. We talked about Darius. All this stuff is connected, right? This is not fantasy fairy tale. This was all connected. And so Cyrus, man, the Great, he's the ruler of this Persian Empire. And the Persians come in, and they defeat Assyria. They defeat Babylon. So all of that becomes a part of a Persian Empire, a greater Persian Empire. And then Cyrus does something that blows your mind. Cyrus, this Persian king, this Persian emperor, the very first year that he's taken all this, he makes a decision. I'm going to let Jews, if they want to, I'm going to let Jews go back to their land. And so you've got this period of exile, then you've got a period called the period of return. And it's where wave after wave, several generations of Jews will take and they'll begin to migrate back into that land that they believed was their land. They go back into Jerusalem. Eventually the walls of Jerusalem are rebuilt. They go back into Jerusalem. Eventually another temple, where the original temple was, the one that Solomon had. Another temple is reconstructed. Right? And so you've got principal figures in that. I'm just going to throw out one. For that period then of return and rebuilding, probably the most famous figure is a guy named Nehemiah. Some of you have heard of him, maybe. Some of you have not. That's okay. But his name's Nehemiah. Let me tell you what, in the ancient world, your city is not going to last unless it's a fortified city. It can't make it. And so Nehemiah becomes a principal figure in that he's leading in the reconstruction of Jerusalem and, more importantly, the walls of Jerusalem. Nehemiah had risen into very high status in the Persian Empire. And so he gets it done. And so there's that period of return where now Israel's sort of being rebuilt, and Jerusalem's being rebuilt, a temple has been rebuilt. What was that? And so for adherents of Judaism, they believe there was this period of time in the history of time where there was that time of return. And then around 400 BC, for adherents of Judaism, how they see their history playing out. And that's what we've looked at. As adherents of Judaism would see their history playing out, they would say, there's one more period. There's a period of waiting. There's this period of silence. We said silence and waiting. And what that meant is there's this period of time where there's not new revelation from God to be added to their canon. Right? All the prophecies have been made. All the, almost you could say, all the thus saith the Lord, he said it. So we've got the canon, and it's complete. There's nothing to be added, and we're waiting. So what are they waiting for? Well, adherents to Judaism believe that they're waiting for the Messiah. So it's that period of silence. Man, the canon's complete.
And is that when they're going to build the other temple in Jerusalem?
Well, eventually, you're right, Steve. Associated with that, a lot of Jews that are adherents to Judaism believe that a third temple has to be created. You say, well, what happened to the second one? It was rebuilt. That's a whole nother story I'll tell you after a while. And so you've got this period of silence and waiting, and that's kind of how they see their world playing out. Let me go back here. Here's a picture, though. I'm going to go ahead and tell you about this temple. Here's a picture. This is a photograph, an aerial photograph of the old city of Jerusalem today. All right, so here's ancient Jerusalem, the walled city of ancient Jerusalem. This area through here is called Temple Mount, and this is the area where the temple of God, at least here's Judaism, would say the temple of God was built. It was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. It was rebuilt under that time frame. Remember we talked about return. It's rebuilt. You got some guys like a guy named Ezra that's going to be a principal figure in that reconstruction project there. And so this thing's rebuilt. But now, here it is. Here's Temple Mount. And we see a structure on there. I'm going to just tell you, that is not the second temple. That's not the second temple of Judaism.
Where's that third temple supposed to be built?
It's supposed to be built on Temple Mount. It's supposed to be built on Temple Mount.
So they're supposed to destroy that mount there?
Something's got to give. There's something there. Something's going to have to give. Well, here's what happens. So you look at this right here, and you see this golden sort of colored
Dome of rock.
Right? Yeah, it's called. And here's what I want you to know. That second temple had been destroyed in 70 A.D. In 70 A.D., that second temple was destroyed. Here's how it happens. The destruction of that second temple is a part of something called the Great Diaspora. Great Diaspora. Great Diaspora. What the Great Diaspora means is this: the scattering of Jews. It means the scattering of Jews. You see what ends up happening. In 70 A.D., we just got through with the Roman world, right? We talked about the Roman world. Rome, remember we had said, remember we had said that, hey, as Rome would create these provinces, they didn't just do away with all local leadership. They would allow local rulers to rule and to lead, understanding, though, that Roman officials would supersede the authority of local officials, right? And Roman law would supersede local law. And so Judea, under this guy named Pompey, remember Pompey, the guy who had gotten in with Julius Caesar, and then they go to the Second Civil War? That guy had taken that area called, that they eventually called Judea, for Rome. And Jerusalem and all that was part of it. Well, going back, remember we had said that in every province that was established, a Roman presence would be placed. You would have a Roman military presence. Right? Well, that was the case in Judea. In Jerusalem, a Roman garrison existed. Well, Jewish zealots who wanted independence from the Roman Empire had attacked that garrison and completely destroyed it. So what ended up happening, man, in Rome, in the Roman world, you don't do that. See, in the Roman world, you do something like that, Rome's going to kill you. And they did. So, Titus, the son of Vespasian, that doesn't matter, you don't have to know those names. He's going to lead a military into Jerusalem, and it's a slaughter. Hundreds of thousands of Jews will flee that area. That's why it's called the Great Scattering, the Great Diaspora, because Rome's coming in and they're destroying Jerusalem now. And they're killing thousands and thousands of Jews. And if you're a Jew and you want to survive, you've got to get. And so you've got Jews that are scattering into northern European lands. You've got Jews that are scattering into Slavic lands. You've got Jews that are scattering and settling into the Arabian Peninsula region, trying to get away from that Roman presence. And when that happened, when the Great Diaspora happened, that second temple was destroyed. That second temple was destroyed. And so I just want to make you responsible for that. It's called the Great Diaspora. The only thing that remains of that structure is this wall. There's a wall in Jerusalem called the Wailing Wall. For adherents of Judaism, that is an extremely sacred structure. It's called the Wailing Wall. And so today, if you're an adherent of Judaism, and you're serious about your faith that is Judaism, you would probably, if you live, especially if you lived in Jerusalem, you would periodically come to the Wailing Wall and offer prayers to God. Now they'll offer these prayers to God and they'll write them out. And they will slip them in the crevices, in the slots of that wall. And so, very, very holy, very, very sacred sign. You saw a dome there. Steve's right. Adherents to Judaism believe that a third temple has to be constructed. And it's got to be constructed on Temple Mount. And then you've got this dome there. We're going to talk about that later in a different context. But that is some contested space. We'll just say that. Hey, when we start back on Tuesday, we're looking at concepts concerning God. We get through Christianity probably in a period, and then maybe get through Islam in that next period. Y'all have a good one, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Y'all have a great weekend.
I thought
Hey, came in late. Let me mark you here. Please just let me know. Yes, Dave.
I thought the third temple was supposed to be built beside the temple, the Dome of the Rock.
That would be nice. But no.
The Muslims won't allow it, huh?
That's not what happened. And Jews wouldn't want that either. Yeah, they wouldn't want that. No, you're fine.
Do you need them? Oh, you're right.
You came in just a little late. I'm gonna mark you here.
Thank you.
I got you. Yeah, and you can talk with your mom and dad. So there's some interview things that you can do. Talk with your mom and dad, and I talk with your aunts and uncles.
So is it like how your family might be going?
Like I said, it's very open. It's very open, and I just want you I want you to spend a little time thinking about your own family from an historical perspective. There are stories to be told. There are things that are of value. There are sort of some experiences, maybe in some people that have helped shape your family at the time, and then obviously they shape who you are. And so I just want you to have some liberty to do that. So yeah, it's not hard.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so I ain't got to list all the famous people that was, because the only famous person that's in my family that's really famous was Jesse and Frank James.
Well, dude, I don't have any, so you got two more than I do.
I got Jesse and Frank James, and
So I have a special.
and on my dad's side, he's kin to Nikola Tesla somewhere down the road.
Can I bring it in and let you know?
Yeah, if you want to do a rough draft, let me look, see how it's going. Yeah, that'd be great.
Just mark it down.
So maybe.